Hi, Kathryn. It's really lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us, because I know you've got an incredibly busy schedule with the launch of Listen. You're doing all sorts of interviews and commentary in all sorts of places. So grateful for the time.
Thanks, Melissa. Lovely to talk to you.
You too. I was reading a couple of the reviews around Listen, and one that really struck me was the thought that these kinds of conversations can be had with more honesty and more confidence and fewer regrets. And of course, that really resonated with me because it aligns so beautifully with the work that Violet does. And I think we've explored that together in our work together on the clinical committee, which has been fabulous. Can you explain a little bit around, the principles and the approach behind Listen and some of the conversations that you're hoping this might unlock for more people?
Sure. So I was motivated really by feedback from my first book, which is a book about the way people live while they're dying. And got lots of letters from people saying, okay, I'm convinced now this is something we should be able to talk about, but I don't know where to start. Or I want to talk to my elderly parents, but I'm frightened that I'm going to upset them. Or I'm an older person trying to talk to my adult children and they keep closing me down. So there were all sorts of reasons why people weren't able to embark on these conversations. And largely it seemed to me that they were people who always thought what we need to do is talk. I need to give this other person, these other people, a really good talking to. And that often is the way we think about these things. But I think the secret of these important and tender conversations is that they're about listening more than talking. They're about making a space where a conversation can happen. So talking to my publisher, I started to formulate an idea for we could make this into another book of stories, because I think that theory is all very well, but actually it's stories that help people to think alongside somebody and think, yeah, the way these people have had that conversation, I could imagine having a conversation that goes a little bit like that with this person that I want to have a better conversation with. And that's how the book was born. So it's about listening. It's about how do we create a space and then stop ourselves from interfering with it. Because we so much want to help that we often dive in to fix things for people rather than stepping back and helping them to explore what they could do so that they have the power and they have a sense of achievement when the thing is sorted out, rather than having been rescued, that they've been supported to enable them to fix it for themselves. And some things can't be fixed, of course. So sometimes what we're doing is enabling people to bear something that's really hard.
And there are quite different dynamics in those conversations that you're describing, as opposed to others where we might go into these situations a little less considered. It's fair to say that there's conversations that we're all putting off, right, in all aspects of our lives, whether that's in our personal lives or our professional lives. I guess because of what we're worried will unlock, or that we may not be able to manage what comes up in that conversation, or the person that we're talking to may not be able to manage it. So we put it off. And I guess these types of skills they're not broadly taught. Sometimes they're modelled by people that we observe around us in different practices or different settings, but they're not formally taught. So I think you've given a real gift to so many people in terms of how we can be more thoughtful, be more considerate, and enter tender conversations with a lot more deliberation and thought.
I think it's really important for everybody to realise that conversations they're part of human experience, even from being tiny babies. Babies know that you take it in turns to make the noises, even though the noises are words coming from the adults and babbling coming from the baby. They understand about shared gaze and demanding attention and all of those things. So we're wired for conversation. And I hope what the book is saying to people is, actually, do you know what? You can already do this. This book is designed really to be a kind of companion an encouraging friend to say, how about trying this thing? See what happens in your next conversation. And okay, great, you've done that. Now, here's another thing you can try. Why don't you see how this goes? And when I was trying to work out a kind of a model for it, I realized that to start off with, I was writing as step 1, step 2, and step 3. And then, no, that's not quite right, because it's not like you do one thing and then you do the next thing and then you do the next thing. We're using these skills all at the same time. And so I realized actually the other thing that we do, that we can all do, but we often feel embarrassed to do, is to dance. And that we do lots of things all at the same time, that we hold the rhythm and we move to the music and we try to stay in step with and not tread on our partner. And it's just such a great metaphor for a conversation. And that most of the time they're fairly ordinary steps. But if you're really excited or very brave, you can do some fancy twirl that you know, every now and again, you might need to do something just a little bit more eccentric in a tender conversation. But most of the time, if you just trust yourself and lean into it, you'll be okay, just like dancing.
They're not linear, are they? There's not step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's I guess an art and a practice of working with what emerges and not being afraid of the silence that might be needed in those conversations to make sense of what's emerging.
I think the silence is a thing that we have started to feel awkward about. We even describe silence as awkward silence, don't we? And if we gave silence a better label, you know, thoughtful silence, then we'd be describing what happens in the silence. There is so much stuff going on, isn't there? Inside each individual's head, all the work is happening. And silence is the space in which we consider things, make our minds up, change our minds. So if a conversation only has talking in it, there isn't the space for the thinking to happen. So silence is the extra companion, I think, in every really useful conversation.
Kathryn, I think recently we were so lucky to have your involvement in the co-design of our podcast series, Violet's 5 Questions, where we designed 5 questions and sat down with a range of experts to unpack some very profound conversations they had had through the course of their professional lives or personal lives around the last stage of life. And I wonder if you would reflect a little bit on that process and maybe what you think listeners might really value or take away from that series.
I've loved working on this, and I'm just so grateful to have been invited to help to formulate the questions. What I hope that listeners will get out of it, the questions the conversations I've heard are each very different. They're each with people who we would think of as highly skilled practitioners. But actually, they're with 5 humans. They're deeply human contemplations of a very significant conversation they've had. And I've really enjoyed listening to them. I think what's really nice is the last question is, if you could go back now, what would you do differently? Which really shows that all of us come out of a conversation thinking, partly, phew, I'm so glad that we've had that conversation. It's not hanging over us anymore. I feel better for having said that. I feel better for that person having told me that. But we also walk away thinking, if only I thought this, asked that. So we never think that it's wonderful, but we can all do it well enough. And I think that's what the 5 Questions podcast really show.
So we're really looking forward to sharing it. In, I guess, a lot of the work that Violet is doing, where we're working with businesses and providers right across the system, all the places that we would turn to for help in the last stage of life, and where working with those businesses to help them have better conversations around this sensitive and sometimes taboo area, how they can do this better with their customers, with their members, with their employees, how to normalise these conversations and constructs in those settings. And I wondered what your thoughts might be. You know, how could we, or what would it take to really step into these conversations in a workplace setting, and what might be more possible as a result?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? Nothing succeeds like success. So I guess that after a person's had the courage to have that conversation a couple of times, they will then feel a little bit less daunted. So it's about how do we encourage people to step in? And one of the things that I've talked about in the book that I think relates to this is the notion that when we would like to move the conversation into a sensitive area, that has to be by mutual consent. So the idea that we're inviting somebody rather than launching into telling somebody, I think is key here. And so when you think about people who are working on call lines for an insurance company, for example, to be able to make an invitation, that's all we would ask them to do is make the invitation. Have you thought about how you might get some extra help with this? Because I have some ideas that might help you if you'd like to talk about it. And it's not insisting, it's offering help. And it may well be that the person doesn't want to take it up that day, but goes away and thinks about it and then comes back and phones back to say, do you know, the other day when I was talking, I was offered this and I wasn't ready for it then, but actually, do you know, I'd like to know about that now. So there's something about not thinking that when you take the lid off, you've got to do the whole thing all in one go, because that's only fair if both of you are ready to do the whole thing all in one go. So it's nudges, isn't it? It's being able to say to people, what could you ask that's just an invitation? And if the first thing you ask is warmly received, what could you move to next? So you're gradually taking a conversation at this person's pace, rather than suddenly shocking them with oh, I've got a great idea for end-of-life care preparation. And that little phrase, end of life, has never yet entered the head of the person that you're talking to.
There are moments that occur in a workplace setting where you might be able to share aspects of other parts of your lives. For example, my toddlers kept me up all night, I'm exhausted. But sharing the emotional burden and the worry around caring for someone in the last stage of life, it's just not something that we're so easily able to put words behind. And I wonder what it would look like if we were able to observe certain behaviours or needs in our colleagues or people that we work for or people that work for us, and be able to have a more honest and willing and capable conversation with them in a way that's safe for both parties, to help them access, what they might need as they go through that. But,
and it is about keeping people safe, isn't it? There are some days when people go to work as their safe place. It's the place where all of those pressures are different, because somebody else perhaps is at the bedside of the person that they're worried about, and they're going to have a day where they're doing something different, and that they're able to feel the safety of that. And actually a person saying, and how is your dear dying mum doing? Actually, that's not a conversation I want to have here. So there's something about, again, just issuing the invitations, isn't there? To say, I know your mum isn't so well, and if you'd like to talk about it when you have your coffee break, I'm happy to listen, but no pressure. And that's just creating a culture that says, we'll listen when you want to talk, but we're not going to prise the lid off and just take a kind of prurient interest, because actually you need to be safe. You need to feel that we are respecting your right not to talk as much as your right to talk to us if you like to.
Kathryn, thank you so much. Lovely to talk as always, and congratulations on the success of Listen.
Thanks, Melissa. Thank you very much.